You know, sometimes people really expose themselves as making it too personal or not really knowing what they're talking about. And that's what's going on right now in relation to the conversation about Russell Wilson. Because there's a lot of slander of good old Russell Wilson going on. And I'm not really a Russell Wilson guy. I find him just as corny as everyone else. I find his commentary of just everything is always positive to come off fake. And I think he cares more about necessarily his fame in general and really the public perception. This probably really bothers him, what's being said, than maybe football, or at least that's what I've even heard from people who've been close to Russell Wilson and people that have been involved with the Denver Broncos and Pittsburgh Steelers. And now, of course, he's a member of the New York Giants. However, the conversation now, seemingly out of nowhere, and maybe partly because of a comparison that I joined in on that Stephen A. Smith made, because Eli Manning is once again on the Hall of Fame ballot, a polarizing candidate to say the least, going to likely get in, did not get on the first ballot. And Stephen A. said something that's accurate that I then wrote about and is correct. That if Eli Manning ever makes it, Russell Wilson has to then join him. If you compare resumes, that would be the only fair way to do it. And once that was said, people then started the Russell Wilson slander. I am Mike Asti here, and this is another edition of Mic Drop, and I am going to drop the mic on the Russell Wilson slander and then get into also why Paul Skenes is now the proud owner of the very best pitching season in Pittsburgh Pirates franchise history. He will not be the first ever Pirate to win a Cy Young Award. That's been done before. But he now has the very best season for a pitcher in the history of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And for anybody who dismisses and says, of course, they haven't been good for most of my lifetime, sure, but the Pirates franchise throughout its entire history has had successful seasons, to say the very least, and does have multiple Cy Young winners, including one who did it in a season the team won an historic world championship, and another who did it in another season the team was very, very good and had a playoff appearance, was in the NLCS. Neither one of them, Doug Drabek or Vern Law, were better than what Paul Skenes did this year on a Pirates team that did not make the postseason and was not able to provide him the win total to match them in their 20-win seasons. But Paul Skenes has the best season for a Pirates pitcher nonetheless. You can find every episode of Mic Drop available everywhere you get your podcasts, and of course on the Believe Network and also Sirius XM. But before I get to Paul Skenes, I am going to go back to this. And again, my entire commentary on this, my entire column is available at Yardbarker. But if Eli Manning makes the Hall of Fame, and I think he's eventually going to get in, the case is borderline. His last name is going to eventually lead him there. Let's be real. Russell Wilson has to join him. Just the case. But even before we compare both of them, I have to hit on something that was just ridiculous. That now, so I'm streaming this live to record. It'll then be available podcast-wise when I edit and throw it in to the Believe feed, and then it'll go crazy everywhere you get your podcast and on Sirius, of course. But I'm now the morning after Tony Gonzalez and Richard Sherman. They drop some takes that are just asinine. just asinine. Just asinine. And I don't have a dog in this race. Yeah, I covered him when Russell Wilson was with the Steelers. Grew up a Steeler fan. He was okay there. Obviously, nothing to brag about. They're not going to brag about it whenever he's eventually likely inducted into the Hall of Fame. But I got no personal issue with Russell Wilson. I do think he's corny. I do think his personality could be something that maybe these guys don't like. And maybe that's here influencing what they had to say. But as an analyst, you're supposed to leave that to the side. They did not. And if they claim they didn't leave the personal feelings to the side, certainly one of them in Richard Sherman, if he claims this is not personal at all, then he legitimately doesn't know ball. And I'm not one. Obviously, I wasn't a finely tuned athlete like the two of them, and yet embarked on this media career, a lot of it involving my opinion and being able to analyze and drop my opinion. They professionally drop their opinion. And obviously, they're national and they're at greater heights than myself. And they did play at a very, very high level. Tony Gonzalez is a Hall of Fame tight end, and Richard Sherman could argue himself as earning Canton. But being a former player does not guarantee that you have the stuff to be a legit analyst or to be a good one, at least. Someone may give you a microphone and put you on national TV and pay you a lot of money because you did play, and that may be a leg up for you, but it doesn't mean you're doing a good job or you deserve it. And there are many former athletes that do a good job, do put in the work, and do deserve the spot. Even if maybe they get a foot in the door because they're a former athlete, they even deserve that because they gave blood, sweat, and tears to earn that spot. But when they get there, they do the work, they analyze, they put personal feelings aside, and they don't look foolish. Tony Gonzalez and Richard Sherman, they look foolish right now to me. And I'll give you what was said. So Tony Gonzalez, if there ever was somebody who played himself out of a Hall of Fame, it's Russell Wilson. And it almost sounds like he's talking about across sports, not even just the Pro Football Hall of Fame and in the NFL, the way he phrased that. And of course, talking about the final years of Russell Wilson's run at Seattle and then the Denver and, year or so, and then the Steelers and now with the Giants, and he's coming off being benched despite all the yards he's thrown. He's 0-3 right now with New York. Obviously, the Steeler tenure was okay, but nothing to really brag about. The Denver tenure was worse. And yeah, he threw some touchdown passes that first year, but Sean Payton never liked him. They didn't get along. Sean Payton embarrassed him in the middle of a game. He kind of took that on the chin and moved on, and they were willing to pay him a lot of money to get the hell out of there. It's been rough. And even the end of Seattle, he definitely showed decline. Granted, right prior to the end of Seattle, he was elevating the team, which I'll get into here. That's what Tony Gonzalez is talking about, though, that these recent years ruined the whole career for Russell Wilson when it comes to the Hall of Fame. Tony, that is not how the Hall of Fame works, and that is ludicrous, if that is your take. The Hall of Fame takes into account your entire career. Your entire career. It is incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. And maybe we are getting, benefit of the doubt to Tony Gonzalez. Maybe we are getting a bit skewed on what's gone on recently. Maybe what Tom Brady did at the end, even Peyton Manning winning a ring, granted his championship season, not great, 9 TDs, 17 picks. Even Favre with his best stat year ever when the Vikings went to the NFC title game. Maybe those seasons, even Joe Montana way back, maybe those years at the end when they get late 30s, early 40s and the success those guys had has skewed our thoughts on the quarterback position or even athletes in general, Tony. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the only benefit of the doubt I can give him. But granted, he should still do his research and know the position, know how the Hall of Fame works. Because the Hall of Fame, again, takes into account your entire career, including that first decade with Seattle when he was a Pro Bowler every year. They went to 2 Super Bowls. They won 1. He was certainly elite in many of those years, maybe not in the beginning when they won the ring, because we'll get to Sherman in a moment, because the defense was so good. But he managed the game then and then became elite, elevated other receivers, still was getting it done and making them a contender when defensive players were kind of cast offs because of money and the defense started to decline. That Legion of Boom Sherman's talking about was not great all through that decade. but the overall numbers are there despite the recent seasons. And there is no such thing as the way your career ends ruins the Hall of Fame. If you establish yourself a Hall of Fame resume, that does not go away because then maybe you're not good the next season. There are very few quarterbacks or athletes in general that have had great ends to their career. John Elway went off into the sunset winning back-to-back championships, but those 2 rings that he won, he wasn't nearly as good as he was in the 80s when they went to the Super Bowl and lost. Those were the best John Elway years. He had a great defense, great run game with Terrell Davis, a Hall of Famer. Great team with Denver those last 2 years. Great he won those rings and cemented himself. But his best years were years earlier when he didn't win a championship. Those Broncos teams that won back-to-back in 97, 98, they weren't the best of John Elway. If you think so, you got it wrong. Peyton Manning's championship with Denver wasn't even probably one of the top 8 years of his career. He had MVP years better than that one. Again, 9 TDs, 17 picks. But even leaving that debate aside, it's a fact, everyone would agree here, that it's very common for an athlete to have his final years be rough. Very few ride off in the sunset with a title. Very few put up great stats in their final years. Very, very few do that. And oftentimes when they do, Barry Bonds did, for example, he's accused and kind of known to have cheated in a way and taken steroids in baseball. Other cases are the ones I mentioned on quarterbacks, the Tom Brady's, LeBron James in basketball. They are legends. Those 3, they are legends and goats of their sport. The Bonds is the LeBron James and Tom Brady. Those 3 arguably are the goats of their sport. Bonds, LeBron, and Tom Brady. Yeah, late 30s, 40s, they were still getting it done. Not as good as earlier, but still getting it done. Either Bonds accused of cheating, LeBron now showing signs of decline, not nearly what he was, no longer the face of his franchise. Tom Brady had a great offensive line, had a great team around him, but still a little bit left that was not there, a little bit lost from where he was a decade earlier when he was with Moss. Didn't win a ring that Moss year, but that was maybe the best Brady year with that touchdown record, and they were 18-0 before losing in the Super Bowl to who I'll get to in a moment here in Eli Manning. But again, it's rare to end well, to have the end be sound, to have the end be great. But the end does not ruin the beginning if the beginning is worthy of the Hall of Fame. And Russell Wilson's beginning is a case that can argue for the Hall of Fame if you look at where he is. Almost to 50,000 passing yards. Well over 300 touchdown passes. You add the rushing TDs in, he's almost at 400. Completion percentage of well into the mid-60s. Does have the ring, the 2 appearances. Pro Bowler 10 times. 10 times. You could say you don't want to water it down and put him in, sure. But then you can't put Eli Manning in, and we'll get to that in a moment. Those guys argued for Eli Manning in different segments in the past. Makes no sense. But Tony, you don't have the final years ruin the first decade if the first decade's Hall of Fame caliber. Once you establish yourself as a Hall of Famer, that does not go away. We're not talking about individual awards. We're not talking about the MVP here. We're not ranking him where he is right now as an elite quarterback. I'm not even arguing that he should still start. He shouldn't. He probably never should start. He should have started with the Giants. The Steelers probably should have gave it to Justin Fields all the way through, never benched him for Russell Wilson. What does it do to have Russell Wilson linger on? And maybe some of the stats recently now are skewed, some of these passing yards. Maybe he shouldn't have been in there. He's just throwing the ball up. But that first decade with Seattle provided his Hall of Fame case. The Hall of Fame is the whole career. The whole career. Not just a few years that are in your brain because you're a prisoner of the moment. And it's incredibly rare for a couple bad years to ruin the previous 10 to 15 if they're Hall of Fame caliber. So, Tony, that's not how the Hall of Fame works. And you may not know the history of the sport, despite being a great athlete and great at your position in that sport. And then separate and worse, maybe, Richard Sherman's rebuttal, in a way, his response, his agreement with what Tony G said. Without that legendary defense, of course, referring to his own Legion of Boom, he's been 4-11, 7-8, 0-3 to start with the Giants. Richard Sherman. What the hell, man? Come on. That has to be personal. And Richard Sherman's a really, really smart guy. I don't know if Tony Gonzalez studies football and knows the history of the game and really should be there. He looks the part. Obviously, he's a good-looking guy. I'll say that. Was a great player. That's going to put him on TV. I know Richard Sherman knows the game. I've heard him articulate the history of the sport. He's an incredibly intelligent man, a Stanford-educated man. He doesn't have the Tony Gonzalez stereotypical TV looks necessarily, but he has the brain, and he was a great athlete and a great player. He deserves to be there. But when he talks Russell Wilson, he gets into the personal because he doesn't like the guy. Maybe for what I said at the top of this show. Maybe because Russell Wilson's corny. Maybe because he thinks Russell Wilson's fake. Maybe he didn't like being a teammate of Russell Wilson when his brain started going off the field compared to on the field. And that did start happening with Seattle. Fair. Say that. Say he wasn't a great teammate. I didn't like playing with him. When he got married to Sierra, fair or not, that's his wife, but fair or not, I felt like his brain went elsewhere. If you want to say that, say it. I can say I've heard that from people. I'm a media member. I'm a reporter. I can say I heard that from others. I have sources who've told me that. I can't say that has been my personal experience when I've been around Russell Wilson. He would answer my question. I take him at face value. But others have said that answer, Mike, was fake. I mean, I would get texts sometimes from somebody I know that was around him a lot with Denver when he was with the Steelers, and I would put up a tweet of a Russell Wilson quote. I would get, the laughing face emoji a lot from a friend who covers the Broncos. There are people that think he's fake. Okay. Richard Sherman, you're qualified to comment on it. You played with the man for a long time, won a championship with him, played in 2 Super Bowls with him. If you want to go out there on Front Street and say, this is a fake man, this guy is fake, what he says here is fake, he's corny as hell, and I don't like him, okay, go ahead. But to use all of that to disparage his career, including the time with Seattle, and then bring up the team's records with the Broncos, Steelers, and now Giants is ludicrous, is asinine, and is weak. Because it's personal. Richard Sherman, you don't like him. So now you're trying to sully his entire career with an argument that is just ridiculous. Sure, his teams haven't won in recent years. And sure, he's declined. As I just said earlier, it's common for a quarterback to decline. He's getting now into his older years. This is not a 25-year-old Russell Wilson we are talking about. This is a late 30s Russell. He is not Tom Brady or Peyton Manning or Brett Favre or the Barry Bonds or LeBron James of the sport. He's not going to just be immortal. This decline is normal. But he also was on bad teams. The Steelers, yeah, okay. You want to say average instead of bad, fine. The Broncos, they weren't a contender. That was rough there. Sean Payton hated him. You're talking about hate. They didn't fit, maybe not personally, but professionally didn't like him. That was never going to work once he got there. And then this New York team is not supposed to go anywhere. Who's out here saying that this New York team is going to win a title? You put Tom Brady in that same mold of when he won the championship with the Buccaneers on this Giants roster, they're not winning a Super Bowl. There's not enough there defensively. The Lions are not giving you enough. Yeah, there's an all-pro receiver maybe in Neighbors. This is not a championship caliber team here. This is not a contending unit. This is not a roster that should go ahead and win 12 games. You would need to be damn elite to try to elevate this roster. Nobody thought the Giants are going anywhere. That's why they're going Jackson Dart now. This is a rebuilding season. They're figuring out what they have. Russell Wilson wasn't having horrendous games. He was throwing yards. But the season's going nowhere, and they realize that. Why not try the young kid? Sure, it's a sound thing to do if you're the Giants. It makes sense. But now you can't hold the win-loss record against Russell Wilson now with this Giants team rebuilding and say the whole career prior with the Seattle Seahawks was trash. I mean, come on. Russell Wilson is 40 plus games above 500 in his career. Okay? This is not somebody that is a career loser by any means. It's just not the case. Russell Wilson might be 0-3 right now, but Russell Wilson is 121, 80, and 1 in his career in regular seasons. He's won a championship and went to another one, and they were a consistent playoff team. And while, yes, the Legion of Boom led them maybe to that championship, and you could even argue the second appearance, and yeah, it should have been a handoff, and Russell threw an interception at the end, but that shouldn't even been the play call. That's on Pete Carroll more than anything else. Russell and Seattle should have 2 rings. It was a bad pass, but it was a horrible play call. But you don't win a championship. Just ask any great defensive player who didn't win a championship because the quarterback wasn't good enough on his team. You don't win a championship in the NFL unless your defense maybe is just maybe rare scenarios. If that defense is historic, like say the 2000 Ravens, maybe 85 Bears, that level, even above the Legion of Boom. Maybe then, but not in this era, not in this modern era, not from Seattle on, not from what they did that year to now, maybe way back. You can win a championship in a rare year with bad quarterback play or average to bad quarterback play. Russell Wilson wasn't bad to average quarterback play. He was managing the game early on. He was benefiting from a great defense. The defense did lead them to that championship. That is fair. The defense was the better unit then. But he could have easily screwed it up as the quarterback. We've seen quarterbacks get benefited from great teams they join and then win right away. Ben Roethlisberger, Hall of Famer, of course. I saw it. Right away, joining a team that would be in the AFC title game and then win a championship in year 2. Year 2, his quarterback rating in that game, that Super Bowl game against Seattle, was just awful. Was at the time the worst ever for a winner. He was winning because his teams were great. He played well, sure, certainly in that postseason run, but his team was great to help them get there. This is not the first time that has happened. Russell Wilson's not the only quarterback to have a great defense when he won a championship. Okay? Most quarterbacks have great defenses when they win a championship, because to win a championship, you need to also have a great defense and a great overall team beyond what you do as a quarterback. Go through that now. How many Super Bowl champions have a defense that was 20th, that was 15th plus? I dare you to find one. Most championship teams have a sound offense, sound defense, sound special teams, sound coaching. That's why they win a championship. It's hard out here to win a title. You got to be sound. But to use team records against the guy who built a Hall of Fame resume, won a lot of games with and for you, Richard Sherman, and then make it personal like that? No. That is just ridiculous. Again, mic drop here, made possible by Believe, available everywhere you get your podcasts and on Sirius XM. Talking Russell Wilson and the slander out here on Russell Wilson. And now, to get fully into my article, I'm going to promote myself here. Why not? Because it's very fitting to the topic. And I dropped the mic there in written form, and now I'm about to do it here in audio form. Maybe video if you happen to be checking out the video here on YouTube. You can see me get into this and be full vigor. But again, as I said earlier, now that I finished with the Russell Wilson slander from Tony Gonzalez and Richard Sherman, as ridiculous as their comments were, if you're going to put an Eli Manning, you best induct Russell Wilson. Otherwise, you got something personal, you're not being fair, or you just don't know ball. Period. Because Eli Manning, who's on the ballot again, didn't get on the first ballot. Surprisingly didn't get in, but I didn't think he deserved to be in. I don't know if I ever think he deserves to be in, honestly. I'll give him the Hall of Fame if you want, because we know he's going to get there, but then you got to put in Russell Wilson. That's my compromise. But Eli Manning has an edge on Russell Wilson in passing yards. Has about 57,000 some. Russell Wilson, 46,000 some, I believe. And also Russell Wilson has a lot more rushing yards, of course. Russell Wilson's not done, but, his Hall of Fame resume is pretty much done. Who knows how much more he'll play with the Giants and then when maybe he'll pack it in, maybe after this year. But Eli Manning, in his career, not to this point, he's done. But so Eli Manning in his career finished with 57,023 passing yards to be exact, which is currently good enough for 11th all time. 373 total touchdowns. That gives him some on the ground. The rare touchdown on the ground from Eli. There were a few. And then mostly through the air. 244 interceptions. A completion percentage of 60.3. And that is in 16 seasons. We know he won the 2 rings. 2 for 2 in the Super Bowl game. 2-0. Both wins over Brady and Belichick in the midst of their dynasty. And of course, after the 2007 season, dethroning and defeating, because they were the Kings that year, an undefeated Patriots team that a win there would have cemented themselves as the best team in NFL history, if not one of the best teams in sports history. And I still argue they are, but they lost that game and did not win the championship. And of course, Super Bowl MVP as well for Eli Manning. But Eli Manning had a 117 and 117 overall record. That is right. He's a 2-time champion, and the yards were there, but also a lot of interceptions and a literal 500 record in his career. So for anybody who wants to say Eli Manning is a quote-unquote winner, and that elevates you into the Hall of Fame, even if the stats don't really always say it because of all the picks. He won the 2 rings. Those 2 years, he was a winner. Granted, they didn't really do as much in the regular season, then had to go in those playoff runs. But still, those 2 years, he's a winner and won those rings. Not overall. 117 is 117. If you want to use win-loss record for a quarterback, that's what it is for Eli Manning. And then for Eli Manning, in 16 years, this man only made the playoffs 6 times. 16 years, 10 years, his team did not make the playoffs as even a wild card. And it's not like you got to win a division to get in during his career. You could be a wild card. Multiple wild cards. And Eli Manning only managed to make the playoffs 6 times. Yes, 2 of those years he won a championship. And he was Super Bowl MVP and historic wins over Brady and Belichick. But only 6 times out of 16 years did he make the playoffs. A 117 overall record. All the passing yards, 11th all time. Maybe that is enough right there. Touchdowns are fine. But 244 interceptions. He led the league in picks some seasons. When was Eli Manning ever the best quarterback in football? Ever. Never. Now to Russell Wilson, because Eli Manning is likely going to eventually get in, and this is kind of what started it all and started the slander of Russell Wilson in general nationally. Tony Gonzalez, Richard Sherman in their comments. Go back to the beginning of this show to hear why their comments are ridiculous. But as for Russell Wilson, still going right now, 14 years into his career, and maybe this will be it, but he doesn't have 16, so it's actually less time. He has 46,913 passing yards as we stand. 5,556 more as a runner. Eli's not at 0, but he's not at 5,000 plus, I'll tell you that. 384 total touchdowns. 353 as a passer, so less than Eli as a passer, but if you include all of them on the ground, he has 384 total touchdowns. Does Russell Wilson. And here's the kicker. The touchdown-interception ratio for the metrics, way better. Only 114 picks. Eli Manning, 244. We're talking 100 fewer here, about. A 64.6 completion percentage compared to Eli just barely over 60 at 60.3. And 60.3 is not horrendous, but 64.6, a big jump for a career completion percentage. Way more efficient than 60.3 if you're going to do an average of a whole career. Way more efficient. Fewer interceptions, way more efficient as a passer. The yardage is not there, but it's close. It's going to eventually probably get near 50K. It is close already, but maybe it'll get to 50K depending on how much more he plays. And then you add the 5,000 as a runner, he's over 50 in terms of what he's produced. The championship, the 2 Super Bowl appearances, 10 Pro Bowls. Again, Eli Manning, 4. And then he, as Russell Wilson, is said to not be a winner. Well, that's crazy. Because Eli Manning was 117 and 117 in his career win-loss record. Russell Wilson, 121, 80 and 1, as I mentioned. And 9 trips to the playoffs. So more trips to the playoffs as the starter than Eli Manning in 2 fewer seasons. Just win-loss wise, 40 games above 500, Eli Manning at 500, just win-loss wise. If you want to go to that and not go to the stats, people hate stats. Okay. Win-loss wise, Russell Wilson, 1 fewer ring, should have it though if it wasn't for the play call from Pete Carroll. But 40 games above 500 and 3 more playoff trips in fewer seasons. If you put Eli Manning in the Hall of Fame, if you want Eli Manning in the Hall of Fame, if you're an Eli Manning for the Hall of Fame guy, and I do think he's eventually going to get there because of his last name, the big moments are part of it in pro sports. If you want to go to big moments in the passing yards, I wouldn't even throw a chair for Eli Manning when we look at who's going to get in as well. Phillip Rivers is going to get in with all the yards. His career is basically a mirror of Tan Fouts, who's in for the Chargers. Matt Ryan has a freaking case as an MVP. Granted, he didn't win that championship, but led him there. He didn't blow that Super Bowl. That was the defense. Look at his passing yards. If you just want to go passing yards and put these guys in for passing yards, you got to do it for a lot of guys of this era, but I think they'll probably all get there. Maybe Matt Ryan won't, but Matt Stafford's going to get there with his ring and the success he's had, and even the yards he put up with Detroit and his overall passing yards of over 50K. Yeah, he's going to be there. If you want to put all those guys in, then okay, then Eli Manning would deserve it. But if you do that for everybody and you put Eli Manning in, you got to induct Russell Wilson then. And I don't care what Tony Gonzalez, Richard Sherman, or anybody wants to say because of these recent years now, or because of the jokes, or because maybe he's corny. That's not how the Hall of Fame works. It looks at your entire career and the overall body of work, which Russell Wilson, objectively speaking here, has had a better career than Eli Manning. That's just the case. That's just the case. Again, mic drop here with Believe, available everywhere you get your podcasts and on SiriusXM. I do see somebody here in the live chat, Kyle. Always appreciate you when you jump on any of my shows here in the live. Of course, recording this live for the podcast or for my YouTube channel and then eventually recorded for the podcast. Russell Wilson is a Hall of Fame QB. We are just seeing him in decline. I don't understand the hate. For a guy picked in the 3rd round, amazing career. And that is another thing. Of course, Eli Manning coming out of Ole Miss. We know that he didn't want to go to the Chargers, wanted to pivot himself to the Giants, was successfully able to do that, but was a highly touted first-round quarterback, a part of that first-round class that also includes Big Ben. He was the guy, partly because of his last name and the numbers he put up at Ole Miss, even though they really didn't win there. He was highly touted. Russell Wilson had some college success for sure at NC State and Wisconsin, but he wasn't as highly touted, didn't have the last name, had to figure it out when he got there. Was put in a great situation, but he wasn't offered all the money and was not a early first-round pick by any means, like Eli Manning. 3rd-round pick to do what Russell Wilson's done. And the resume is actually better individually with only 1 fewer ring on a play call that's not on him. A win-loss record that's way better. And doing it more as a runner and a passer than Eli ever could do. If you want to put Eli in because of the moments and because of the rings and because of his last name, okay, you got to induct Russell Wilson. What I don't get is There's so much Russell Wilson hate out there. As any of the pro Eli Manning people for the Hall of Fame, if you say, well, just go ahead and put Russell Wilson in too, then they freak out because they don't want Russell Wilson there. There's just so much hate and slander for Russell Wilson that people in their brains think, well, he can't be a Hall of Famer because of what I've heard the last several years. That's not how it works. The overall resume is there, even though he's now in decline, which is common for not only a quarterback, but a pro athlete, certainly a football player, across sports history. There are legends that didn't decline, even though they did decline a little, but legends that still got it done and were still great players at the end. That's very rare. That's not Eli. Eli wasn't great at the end. That's not Russell Wilson. If you want to put one in, put the other. Sure. And certainly if Eli's in, Russell Wilson has to be there. As a Giants fan, Eli Manning had many peaks and valleys. The thing is, when he had those peaks, he was playing as good as anybody in NFL history. Wish there was more consistency, though. And those 2 championship years could get him there, and that is the argument. However, there are guys that had great playoff careers, not great in the regular seasons, really, that have not been enshrined in their sports Hall of Fames. There are comparisons to Eli Manning. Now, I know there's political things and other things out there, but look at Curt Schilling. He basically is the Eli Manning of baseball in terms of the playoffs, had certainly a better regular season maybe resume than Eli's had. There weren't as many valleys, even though there were, it wasn't like he was the best pitcher in the game. He had some peaks and valleys, but was great in the postseason, was a clutch, big moment guy. Can't get in. And maybe it's off the field stuff there if you don't like that example. Robert Horry, Big Shot Bob, all the rings, Mr. Clutch. He was a role player, can't get in. And the Basketball Hall of Fame's relatively easy to get into in comparison. Those are just a couple. So just playoff success and everything else, peaks and valleys, does not always guarantee you get there. But again, 57,000 passing yards is 57,000 passing yards. And if we're going to put in Matt Ryan, if we're going to put in Matthew Stafford, if we're going to put in Phillip Rivers, I do think all of them get in. At least I do think Stafford and Phillip Rivers get in. Then you got to put in Eli Manning. Those 2 playoff years, he was great. He was pretty clean, didn't throw the picks in those playoff years. Super Bowl game itself, he was maybe above average. He wasn't great, but the overall playoff runs, he was great. But led the league in picks, a 500 record, lost a lot of years, only 6 playoff appearances. He was far from perfect, and the resume is just lower than Russell Wilson. It just is. And you could, Jim Plunkett maybe is one to bring up as well. If you want to have somebody in for moments and for being a great playoff player, elevating themselves when it matters the most, that's a great thing to have as an attribute. Then that is Eli Manning, and maybe he deserves to be enshrined for that. No one's going to rank him in a top 10 all time, but if you want to have him have a bust, put a thing on there and say he did this against that team, he's in that moment, and he was a great playoff player, and the overall yards are there for passing. Okay, go ahead. I don't see how then you avoid Russell Wilson. That's my problem. That's my problem. But then there becomes this energy of Russell Wilson hate out there that I think he's corny. I think he's a little fake. I've heard that from others. Does that mean I'm not going to put him in the Hall of Fame if the resume is there? If you want to induct Eli Manning and others? No, that's not how this should work. The resume was there before he got to Denver. And if you want to argue that, okay, but then there's no way you can argue Eli Manning. There's no way you can put Eli Manning in and not Russell Wilson. That's just the case. Again, mic drop here with Believe, available everywhere you get your podcasts and on SiriusXM. So I think I dropped the mic on it enough here in written and audio form, in video form, and podcast form, and everywhere you can ask. I think I dropped the mic on it. The Russell Wilson slander got to stop. Just because you're a great player does not mean you're a great analyst, and there's a responsibility there to actually do your homework and know what you're freaking talking about. Maybe put personal feelings aside, Richard Sherman, Tony G. And if Eli Manning's going to get in, you got to put Russell Wilson in. There it is. You got to. Russell Wilson's had, and objectively, and I feel like I'm objective here. I'm not a Giants fan. I don't hate either one of these guys. I do think Russell Wilson's corny, but I don't hate him personally. I try to be fair when I analyze anybody in any sport, anywhere. Eli Manning is funny as hell, actually. I think I like him. I mean, I watch him and Peyton on the Manning cast more than the Monday Night Football broadcast a lot of the time. I think you could even argue that what he's doing there and what he does for football in general and what he's done in media and different things of that avenue, maybe even bump him in the Hall of Fame even more. Maybe it's beyond just playing. Maybe he's just a steward of the game in addition to what he did as a player. You could actually argue that, and I actually could see that. He's such a part of the game still, and he's going to be that. And he's funny as hell. I think he's funnier than his brother. Wasn't as great of a quarterback, but he's funnier than his brother. Put him on SNL. I'll watch SNL again. Haven't watched SNL in years, but let him host SNL. Maybe I'll freaking watch. But again, if you put him in the Hall of Fame, if you put Eli Manning in the Hall of Fame, then you got to put Russell Wilson in. If I had to pick one of them to hang out with and have a beer, I'd rather hang out and have a beer with Eli Manning. If I'm going to properly evaluate their careers and say who had a better career as an individual in terms of team success and just in general, rating the position and evaluating it as we do, whether it's old school thinking or now, going to the metrics or going to just the stats you want and have always been looked at, Russell Wilson has the edge in way more of that in comparison to Eli Manning. But now, to put the final pin in this episode of Mic Drop here and argue an argument that I don't think needs to be an argument. We like to debate everything. If you look at this, again, if you look at this objectively, I don't think there's a debate here. I even saw a colleague on a show when he was asked this, somebody on the Pirates beat, has Paul Skenes had the greatest pitching season in Pirates history? And his first question to that host who asked him was, what's the debate? Who else is in that race? And then he brought up the guys that I'm going to mention here. The debate is Vern Law in 1960 and Doug Drabek in 1990. That's it. That is the debate. They both won the Cy Young Award. So award-wise, Paul Skenes can't top them. They're both going to have, they both won the Cy Young Award. They're both going to have that matching Paul Skenes, and Vern Law won a World Series. Doug Drabek got close, of at least getting in there with a pennant. And Paul Skenes is far as hell away with the Pirates. That's not the case for Paul Skenes at all in terms of team success. But that's not on him. And that's not how we look at pitchers these days now. We've gone away from that. Felix Hernandez once won a Cy Young Award with 13 wins over a 20-game winner in a future Hall of Famer in CeCe Sabathia with the Yankees. And he deserved it over him. And CeCe doesn't argue it too. I've heard him in interviews say, yeah, he was better than me that year. And CeCe's in the Hall of Fame. I don't think Felix is going to get there, but in that season, Felix Hernandez deserved the Cy Young Award with way fewer wins. His team wasn't as good. What do you want him to do? Using wins against a pitcher in baseball is actually even worse than a quarterback in football. A quarterback in football can do more to win the game. Maybe you can put that on him. And that's, again, if you want to use wins, Eli Manning's win-loss record doesn't look that great, does it? But putting Eli aside, I guess, back to Paul Skenes. And if you want to use win-loss record, then yeah, Paul Skenes isn't going to be there. But using it would just be ridiculous and totally unfair. If you look beyond the win-loss record and you want to compare, then this is why Paul Skenes has the greatest season for a pitcher in Pittsburgh Pirates history. So, for Paul Skenes, his BWAR, his BWAR, is wins above replacement for Baseball Reference, however you want to say it, and I do use Baseball Reference, by the way. I'm more of a Baseball Reference ambassador than wanting to use F4, so if you like F4, okay, it's still better than the other guys, by the way. But the BWAR for Paul Skenes is 7.6 for 2025. That is in comparison to Doug Drabek, In 1990, his Cy Young Award year being at 4.2, and Vern Law in his Cy Young season of 1960 at 4.2. Paul Skenes has a WAR of 7.6 for 2025. He then has an ERA of 1.97, below 2. 200 plus strikeouts and a sub 2 ERA. He's at 1.97. 32 games, 32 starts, 187.2 innings pitched, allowed 136 hits, 45 runs, 41 of them earned, 11 long balls over the fence against Paul Skenes, 216 strikeouts, as I mentioned, 216 strikeouts and a 1.97 ERA. It's one of the best pitching seasons of all time in general, but certainly the best in Pirates history. An ERA plus of 218, a whip of 0.948. Of course, he started the All-Star game. A better year than his rookie season in which he was Rookie of the Year and was an All-Star. But again, Paul Skenes, a WAR of 7.6, an ERA of 1.97, and 216 strikeouts. And yes, the win-loss record is 10-10. He actually did not have a losing record, amazingly. He was certainly on pace for a while. But the win-loss record only at 10-10. That's Paul Skenes. That's the best pitching season in Pirates history. I already gave you their WARs, but let's go to Doug Drabek and go in order of most recent to way, way back with Vern Law after. But in 1990, when the Pirates got going in the 90s, Bonds, Andy Van Slyke, Jim Leyland, the manager, Bell, that Pirates team was a great team. They didn't get to a World Series. They didn't win a pennant. They should have. They didn't get there. They didn't even win a series because you got in right away and then they would lose in those NLCSs. What if story in Pirates history for sure? What if they got to one? How would the franchise be viewed? Would Bonds have stayed? The reality is Doug Drabek won the Cy Young Award in 1990. It wasn't just a great hitting team as it was, and a great fielding team as it was, a great managed team as it was. It was a great pitching staff led by Doug Drabek in 1990. And in 1990, his wins above replacement, as I said, was 4.2 in Baseball Reference. His win-loss record was 22-6. Kudos. 20-win season, the only one of his career. Won 155 games in his career. In fact, barely over 500 in his career overall in 13 years. But in that freaking year, he won 22 games. Not easy to do. Props to him. Obviously, he played in a great team, though. Great team. Way better team than the 2025 Pirates, to say the very least. But in addition to his 22-6 record, he pitched well over 200 innings, so more innings than Paul Skenes. Allowed 190 hits, 78 runs scored, 71 of them earned. Only 131 strikeouts with way more innings pitched to get him. And yes, he won the Cy Young Award and finished 8th. He was in the top 10, but finished 8th for the MVP. So again, Paul Skenes has the edge in earned run average, by the way. Drabek at 2.76. So 22-6, 2.76, and 131 Ks in way more innings pitched. In comparison to Paul Skenes at 1.97, below 2 ERA, only a 10-10 record, but again, not his fault. 216 strikeouts in fewer innings pitched. And then even going to Vern Law in 1960, an historic season in franchise history. They won the World Series. They beat the Yankees, the walk-off homer, all of that. Mazeroski got him in the Hall of Fame, really. Everything you want. Of course, he was an all-star in Vern Law. Of course, he was in the top 10 MVP as well. He actually finished 6th. And he won the Cy Young Award, as you would imagine. It's not to say these guys didn't deserve their awards in those individual seasons. But when you compare to what Paul Skenes did this year, Paul Skenes' year, way better. But in 1960 for Vern Law, 4.2 wins above replacement. By the way, his prior year in 1959, way better at 6.5. Did not win the Cy Young Award that year, by the way, nor did the Pirates win a championship. But that was a better wins above replacement year for Vern Law. But in 1960, this man won a Cy Young Award with a 3.08 ERA, an ERA above 3. Again, the year prior, he was at 2.98, a better year. 3 years prior, he was at 2.87, better. But Law won it in 1960 with a 3.08 earned run average. He started 35 games, so 3 more games started than Paul Skenes. Innings pitched at 266, and way back then they were worked a lot more, so it kind of makes sense. Don't take that into account. He was worked a lot more. Gave up 266 hits. I'm sorry. Was looking actually at the year prior. So 271 innings in 1960. So 1960, 271 innings, 266 hits allowed. Only 120 strikeouts and way more innings pitched. Only 120 Ks. And if you go all the way to WHIP at 1.120, ERA plus of 129, 122. Again, I keep looking at the year prior, but 122. So 122 for the Cy Young Award year, 1.126 for the WHIP. Is not to say it was a bad year. Okay, I'm not out here saying it was a bad year. Vern Law was great in his era and helped them win a championship. Without him, maybe they don't win it. Doug Drabek was great in his era and helped them be a damn good team that got in the playoffs. And they wouldn't have been there without him. They both won 20-plus games, but their ERA, way worse than Paul Skenes. They pitched more innings, struck out fewer batters, every other metric worse. Paul Skenes' team sucks. Paul Skenes' team worse. Paul Skenes himself had the best season for a pitcher in Pittsburgh Pirates franchise history. That's just the case. Again, mic drop here. Believe, made possible everywhere you get your podcasts, or made possible by Believe. Mic drop, made possible by Believe, available on SiriusXM and everywhere you get your podcasts. But Paul Skenes, if you want to go individual hardware, has it right there with Vern Law and Doug Drabek. His numbers are way better. Their teams were better. What else do you want him to do? And if you go way back, I do see some here in the chat. I don't like comparing 2025 to 1919 to 100 years ago and say that 100 years ago is the best season in franchise history for a franchise that has had Hall of Famers, championships, and had success from that point on, even though there obviously was horrible years in the midst there. 1950s, they were awful. The 1990s after Bonds left, they were awful. Most of the 2000s, they've been awful, except for those 3 playoff years. But for the most part, there's been a lot after the early 1900s for the Pirates. And the game was just so different then. That's hard for me to say that year is the best year. But if you want to compare to more modern years, certainly Doug Drabek's a more modern year. I was alive, obviously barely, but was alive. And Vern Law is way back. You could argue we shouldn't be bringing him up either. Innings pitched a little different back then. But if you want to, fine. The numbers just are worse. And the Doug Drabek comparison to Paul Skenes, the numbers are worse in a more similar era, even though still 35 years ago. But for me, Paul Skenes, the greatest Pirates pitching season of all time, already deserves Pirates Hall of Fame 2 years in. I don't care where else he goes. I don't care. 2 years in, these are 2 historic seasons. Best rookie year, overall best year for a Pirates pitcher. Second year, put him in. Is he going to stay after his contract's up? No. Are they going to ship him out before that contract's up? Probably. Does him and Livy Dunn one out already? Probably. He's too damn nice to argue out, though, but probably. She knows. Just look at her tweets and her posts and her replies on IG. She knows this Pirates franchise isn't going anywhere. She knows he's stuck there now and wants to be the nice guy, but they're going to bounce. She knows what it is to be a Pirates fan. She even said it. That's why she had the sweaty pits in that image. She put it out there. That's just life of being a Pirates fan. She knows. She already knows. But for me, unless you go back a century and really want to get in the nitty-gritty of the early 1900s or the 19-teens, where some of their stats are a little better, Paul Skenes has the best year. He certainly had a better year than Doug Drabeck and Vern Law. If that is the debate, if it's Doug Drabeck and Vern Law, because that's what's been brought up basically with everybody, if you want to go him against those two, then it's Paul Skenes for sure. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Again, I dropped the mic on the Russell Wilson slander, why if you put Eli Manning in, you got to put Russell Wilson in, and why Paul Skenes has the greatest pitching season in Pittsburgh Pirates history. Mic Drop can be found everywhere you get your podcasts, on Apple, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. It is made possible by the Believe Network, powered, fueled, whatever you want to say. And it is also available, thanks to Believe, on SiriusXM. And for anybody wondering here on the video, maybe you're just listening audio, so I'll describe it for you. But anyone listening here on the video or watching on the video, you want to, Central Catholic, Central versus everyone, I'm going to wear that. It's a local Pittsburgh area high school, private school, Catholic school. I went there. I'm an alum. Central versus everyone. So represent all day, every day, even though pretty much anybody else outside of the region may not be familiar, but you might be. Dan Marino, all-time quarterback. Mark Bolger, great all-time stat guy early in fantasy football days. They're alums, others as well. So was there visiting not too long ago. Got this shirt, got some other merchandise they hooked me up with. But Central versus everyone here on the video. It'll always be that way. It'll be that way every day, all day, Central versus everyone. But I'll be here dropping the mic, representing Central Catholic, and dropping the mic on anything you want to give me, But I'm going to need people to bring down the slander and look at things and try not to make it as personal as you've been. Russell Wilson deserves a little bit more than that, despite, being that corny guy that he is. But Central Catholic versus everyone, and mic drop forever.